What's up guys? Welcome to AnimeKouhai. If you'd like to help me out, please hit the like button and subscribe to my channel.
This was the current situation surrounding our country. In the end, I felt that the Empire's only option was to go through the Great Jura Forest. Before my meeting with Benimaru, which had become a daily routine, I went through these same plans once more. In case they chose the Great Jura Forest route, which we defended, it was obvious that the greatest obstacle, from the Empire's perspective, was Veldora's existence. They wouldn't attempt a frontal assault, so they'd probably try to trick Veldora by preparing a decoy unit. With that in mind, I had to consider our country's defensive setup. There were three possible routes for initiating military operations within the Great Jura Forest. However, one of them was adjacent to Dwargan's territory. If the Empire ignored our warning and came to invade, the Dwarven Kingdom and our army could catch them in a pincer attack. The Empire would definitely be aware of how dangerous this option was, so I think it's fine to set a lower alert level. It was more likely that the Empire would strike by using one of the two remaining routes. But is it really that straightforward? It was a bad idea to split your forces when facing a large enemy, so we could deploy Veldora on one side and our full army on the other. If we employed this tactic, then we should be able to handle the Empire, even if they prepared a diversionary force. Even I, who was by no means an expert in military affairs, could formulate something like this. Thus, I had my doubts that professional soldiers would set out to war with such a simple strategy. There was also the possibility that the Empire was looking down on us, thinking that with an overwhelmingly massive army, they could trample over us, regardless of Veldora or our monster army. On the other hand, perhaps they would utilize an underhanded strategy instead of facing us head-on. For instance, they could use the regular army as bait and initiate guerrilla warfare with elite troops in small groups. What if they split into platoon-sized units in order to infiltrate the forest and then regrouped somewhere else? In these cases, it'd be impossible to monitor all of the minor trails throughout the woods. If we carelessly deployed a reconnaissance force, depending on the scale of the enemy, it might come back to haunt us. Just like what Hinata had done before if a platoon of Holy Knight-level troops were dispatched. If we took that prospect into account, there wouldn't be enough troops to cover all possible incursions. It was risky if we moved to intercept the Empire after determining their objective, so I wanted to avoid that as much as possible. And if we lost the initiative, there was the chance that we'd fall into an unrecoverable position. Although we were trying to be vigilant for that exact reason, the crux of the matter was that we couldn't read the Empire's movements. In war, the more unpredictable you were, the bigger the advantage you held over your opponent. Oftentimes, making an unexpected move would be enough to clinch a victory. As a result, we had to consider every single possible scenario. It's no use, my mind's going in circles. I became irritated when those thoughts bubbled up. Wouldn't it really be better for me to attack first? Or rather, wouldn't attempting a blitzkrieg, the moment the Empire declared war, be the correct answer? Since we couldn't guarantee that the Empire would move according to our predictions, it was pointless to dwell further on this subject. No matter how many times I thought it over, I felt that launching a preemptive strike was the rational thing to do, rather than waiting for an opponent to make their move. We wouldn't be overwhelmed with worries and could seize the initiative. Well, I won't do it. No matter how long I mulled it over, the perfect answer wouldn't drop from the sky. It was smart to be flexible about these things. In other words, playing it by ear. Somehow, it sounded cool and gave the impression of a capable man. Right, let's do that. Having reached my usual conclusion, I grabbed the cream puffs that Shuna had prepared. All this hard thinking gave me a craving for sweets. Although some claim you would get sick of having too much of the same thing, that had never happened to me. Well, if that ever did happen to me, I might reconsider.
Hey, eating them alone is so unfair.
While I was in the middle of enjoying my cream puffs with Shien's black tea, Benimaru finally arrived. We were in my office. He was a little late to our meeting, which somehow had become a routine. He must have been extremely busy, given that he was in charge of war preparations against the Empire. Complaining about tardiness would have been quite petty of me. What? Help him? I have no idea what you're saying. If you aren't an expert, you're better off leaving it alone. I know, awfully convenient of me to say.
Shien, pour Benimaru some black tea, too.
Understood.
Benimaru seemed to have been traumatized by Shien's cooking, and as a result, always wore a wary expression. It was okay if it was just black tea, but still, his cautious attitude never faded, very typical of him.
Thank you. Nothing like a couple sweets to get you going again.
Well, good thing we've got sugar to spare. It'd be nice if this peace continues.
Right. I guess if a decisive battle were to come, we could just beat them and call it a day.
Benimaru's confidence was as strong as ever. Although reliable, I hope he didn't forget to make an effort to avoid war as the first option.
Enjoy.
Shion placed the cup of black tea in front of Benimaru. She poured some more for me too. It had a wonderfully relaxing scent.
What about Diablo?
Benimaru asked.
Ah, he has another day of arbitration.
Again?
Yeah, again.
Yep, Diablo was out mediating. Ultima and Carrera got into a spat every single day. It wasn't that they didn't get along, but rather they tried to compete with each other in any way, shape, or form. Yesterday, it was about the extradition of criminals, and before that was the treatment of suspects in custody. Sometimes they'd fight over the food menu, and other times they'd argue about who should buy the latest fashion clothes first. Everything would be fine if it were just a verbal debate, but when those two fought, their ferocity could surprise even the Yakuza. Only Diablo could stop those ruthless perpetrators. Venom, who was Diablo's subordinate, was already a victim, having been abused both verbally and physically by Ultima and Carrera. No damage had thankfully been inflicted upon the town's residents, and in fact, it had actually become famous enough to lead people to make bets. But it was still a problem that we couldn't turn a blind eye to. That was the reason why I had Diablo sort things out, but it might be time to think of a permanent solution. Otherwise, the situation might change for the worst. I could already feel that Diablo was going to snap sooner or later. Speaking of which, Diablo took Ultima and Carrera to the labyrinth a few days ago. He was brimming with enthusiasm not because of something fun and sweet such as a date, but about the thought that he was going to give them a thorough scolding. He took advantage of the fact that you couldn't die in the labyrinth and beat them up without mercy, yet it appeared that they hadn't learned their lesson at all. On the contrary, they were rather eager to fight Diablo. Why are the demons so bellicose? Personally, I couldn't keep up with them. While I was having a brief chat with Benimaru, Diablo suddenly came in, looking utterly exhausted.
I'm sorry to keep you waiting.
Oh, thanks for the hard work.
I replied.
No, it's barely enough to warrant calling it hard work. It's just that my time with Rimuru-sama has.
You don't seem tired, so let's get down to business.
All right.
Well, if you can spare the energy to talk nonsense, then I suppose you're okay. Diablo wanted to say something, but it'd just wind up being his usual soliloquy anyway. Putting that aside, Benimaru and I decided to start today's meeting. As I had mentioned before, the number of immigrants to our country had grown. And when that happened, the problem of work allocation to those newly immigrated naturally arose. The employment rate was very important, just like with any other country. This was because if we wished to increase the nation's productivity, then each and every citizen needed to work diligently. If the employment rate was good, then consumer spending would naturally rise, and the economy would improve as well. On the other hand, if it was bad, then the economy would deteriorate, and crime would naturally increase. It was the role of the national leadership to properly manage the task, but obviously, this was exceedingly difficult. There were individual differences in the abilities of the immigrants we accepted, and there was a limit to the amount of unskilled labor that could be assigned to anyone. Our country was still in development, and the onrush of construction work in various locations had kept us afloat. But even that was drawing to a close, and now the question of, what do we do from here, was in the air. Skilled laborers had no problems. If you were an experienced craftsman or someone with enough personal talent to earn a living, then it was an easy question to answer. The problem was those who lacked the knowledge and means to make money. If you were a farmer, then we could grant you farmland. If you were a craftsman, then we could introduce you to a workshop. If you were an adventurer, then the labyrinth was the perfect place, and if you were an actor, then you could be hired by theaters. Still, what about people who did not possess any such talents? The solution I came up with was to establish an education center. At the time of immigration, they'd be asked what they could do, and based on their answer, they would be taught accordingly. The education center would serve that purpose, and it was going to be operated by the military under Benimaru.
The number of immigrants continues to grow, and there are a lot of people applying for the military. Whether or not they'd be useful is another issue, but at the very least, I believe they could manage being assigned to domestic security.
We'd been trying to solve the immigration problem, yet it seemed that there were even more people coming in. If you join the army, you can earn a living. You can also learn skills for free and even get a job. This was the rumor being spread around. As a result, the number of people joining the military gradually increased, which not only included ordinary immigrants but adventurers and mercenaries alike. Well, as long as our country was responsible for the defense of the Western nations, building up our armed forces was a crucial task. For that reason, there were no difficulties for now. While minor complications did arise, those had been at a level that could be resolved within the military. The bigger problem was that war with the Empire was becoming a reality. Obviously, there was no way we could send people who had just been enlisted the day before into combat, so we were forced to reorganize our forces. And so, I had ordered Benimaru to submit a proposal for consolidating our military. He brought forth a single sheet of paper and placed it on the table.
This is the new organizational structure that I've come up with. Some of the personnel changes are a little bold, but I think this will work.
Benimaru held military command authority, whereas Supreme Command Authority, which included the right to appoint individuals into positions, rested with me. It was a little complicated. Originally, military command authority was included in Supreme Command Authority. Now, military command was separated and given to Benimaru. This was due to my belief that an amateur like myself shouldn't interfere with the command of the military. Therefore, Benimaru was entrusted with all matters related to the military. With this setup, Benimaru's orders took precedence over mine within the army. However, strategic command was a different story. I had the power to designate the upper echelon of the military, or to make the decision to end any war we were currently engaged in. Benimaru was free to nominate anyone below the rank of general, but the establishment of corps or the appointment of generals was left to my discretion. He still needed a confirmation from me on whether or not the organization chart that he drew up was acceptable.
If you're okay with it, then I don't have any objections.
Even if I didn't plan on complaining, there might be some things I wanted to say. After all, I would be the one responsible if something went wrong as long as I had the authority to make appointments. Nonetheless, we had already debated numerous times regarding the new organizational structure. I wasn't going to complain or anything, it was already too late for that. And the personnel I kept pushing for until the very end was 1st Corps Commander Datta.
I wasn't too convinced when I first heard about the idea of designating Datta as a general, but now I think he'll be a good fit.
As you can see from Benimaru's reply, there were pros and cons to having Datta become a general. Indeed, the thought of giving that idiot, Datta, responsibilities of a leader was worrisome. It was only natural that Benimaru and his staff were anxious, since the lives of Datta's subordinates would be entrusted to his judgment. Given that he was someone who often slept during meetings, it wasn't like I didn't have any reservations, either. That said, I also knew very well of the fact that Datta had been secretly undergoing special training, and that he was trying his best because he wanted to protect this country.
That's it for this video, guys. Thank you for always watching my videos and supporting my channel. Shoutout to Wubbalubadubdub, Wilfred Miller, Resdi, Tangil, A Tempest, Sheer Jonathan Nala, Chad Vota, Abhishek Pawar, Rembaru, and last but not least, shoutout to Mr. Jaha. I'll see you guys in the next video.